And I am live. We are live. We're going to be joined by Aiden Mattis of the Laura Lodge in a few. He is being on in a second. He's having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we can roll a little bit without him. His Logitech is reinstalling, and he will be on, which will be very cool because he is a cool guy. Today, we're not going to be talking about guns. Even though he's programmed, we're going to be talking a lot about mysteries, such as stuff like missing 411 stuff. There's other stuff that I'm really interested in that I'm really cool, that I think is really cool. In fact, Flying Rich today has learned about the wonderful Flipper Zero, but other than Flipper Zero, he also learned about the M Cave.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird story. So some guy went missing. The cave opening was supposed to be shaped like an M. Nobody has found the cave since? Or did I read that somebody found the cave, they found the guy's phone next to a vertical shaft? Was that the story?
Yeah. Something like that. But there's videos, and the guy said he got a creepy feeling, and he's like, I don't think I should go back. Then he decided to go back, and yeah, Aiden's going to be able to talk about that more. Talking about Aiden, it's Aiden Mattis.
Hey.
Call of Duty player extraordinaire.
Oh, God. Is that what I'm known as?
No. Richard, sometimes we'll be doing a video, and Richard's like, are you playing Call of Duty? I'm like, maybe.
No, you usually say no.
Yeah. No, I'm not playing Call of Duty. So I was telling people about your channel, the Laura Lodge, which is kind of American folklore and Canadian folklore and other stuff. It's something that I'm really interested in. A lot of 411, like missing 411 stuff, also stuff, just all sorts of weird things.
All sorts of weird is a good way to put it.
Yeah. How would you describe your channel?
We describe ourselves as an educational channel approaching topics like history, the paranormal, religion, and folklore from sort of an academic context. So giving you all of the known facts about a subject that is generally seen to be mysterious so that you can come to your own conclusions and have a jumping off point for your own research.
Yeah, and you guys cover some missing 411 stuff.
Yeah, missing 411 was the thing that really took us from being... When we started covering those cases, it took us from being a small folklore channel that, was just kind of making videos that got 3,000 to 4,000 views to, 250,000 subscribers. It was that kind of that kind of growth that just came out of nowhere.
What is missing 411?
Sure. Missing 411 as a concept is kind of confusing. A lot of people look at it and they think of it as being a known thing, a known phenomenon where something is happening to people. We know what it is, and these are cases where it happened. And that's really not the case. What it is a profile that was created by a former police detective named David Politis, who was on the San Jose police force for about 20 years. And when he got out of the force, he was recruited this is how he tells the story. I can't corroborate this, but this is how he tells the story. He was recruited by a research organization their goal was to figure out whether or not Bigfoot was real. It wasn't to prove it one way or the other. It was to gather evidence, whether that evidence supported or did not support Bigfoot was not their problem. It was, we want to find the answer to this one way or another. And while on that assignment, he spoke to a lot of park rangers, national park rangers. National park rangers, according to him, a few of them off duty, came and approached him and said that they felt like there was something weird going on with missing persons cases in the national parks, that they weren't properly being investigated, that the government was not taking the necessary steps, to give people answers and to find these people. And his question for the past, it's probably, I think the first book came out in 2011. So for the past 12 years, his big question has been, what is causing this? I think I've identified a profile for these cases. Remember, I'm a police detective. He's looking at this from the, let's figure out who's responsible for this. So he's like, I think I figured out a profile for most of these cases. I think we have the things that connect them. Now let's try and get to the bottom of it. He never gives a concrete answer. I think it's this. But that's kind of the whole idea of missing 411 is it is an unexplained phenomenon. And the goal is to document cases, figure out, is there a rational explanation for this? And if there isn't, then of course, then that's when you start to look at some of the less rational things. We always say we look for a rational explanation first, but when there is no rational explanation, you're forced to think about the irrational ones.
Now,
so are you the new Art Bell?
No.
You don't do this at 2 a.m. You don't go live at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet, but I do Twitch stream to like 9 p.m. So we're starting to get there.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question about the missing 411. Do you think that there's something up, or do you think it's just because national parks are really big and people get lost?
If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said something's definitely up, that there's no explanation for this, that these are far too many people going missing. As I've done more and more research, there's a significant, we put out an 1.5 hour long video on YouTube a couple weeks ago that was going through this point by point. But basically we were like, all right, some of these cases that David Politis presents, they do end up either whether there was the information to solve them when he was looking into it, or if it happened later, like the case of Bobby Beezup, who was I believe he was 10 years old in Denver, Colorado. He was going to a summer camp for Catholic boys that was about like 20 miles south of Denver, I believe it was. And he goes missing. Everybody, the story that is told to investigators is he was just on a little fishing trip down in the creek, a couple 100 yards south of the main camp. And at some point, it was time to go back for dinner. Counselor said, hey, time to go back for dinner. Somewhere along the couple 100-yard stretch here, Bobby disappears. That was in 1958.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Okay.
In 2019, there is a big scandal in Colorado. Clerical sexual abuse of boys. Suddenly, people start looking into that, and they start getting names. And some of those names also pop up at Camp St. Malo in 1958. Ooh. One of those names, I believe it's Neil Hewitt, was a counselor at the camp who was one of the last people to have seen Bobby alive. Everybody else, it turns out, as they went and did interviews, independent interviews, 50 years later, 60, 70 years later at that point, as it turns out, what you get is, well, Neil Hewitt, he's not the only person who saw Bobby. He's the only person that spoke to Bobby, because a bunch of counselors, a bunch of campers also saw Bobby run screaming out of the dining hall. He seemed very upset. He was angry. He was embarrassed. These are the words that are being used. And what it turns out is in 2020, this story about Neil Hewitt being there goes live. This story about how Bobby Beezup, whose remains were found at 11,000 feet when the camp is at 8,000 feet. This is up in the mountains, Mount Meeker, Colorado. Turns out that Bobby's remains, well, they weren't all there. And they figured it was just wild animal scavenging. Except in 2020, when this story comes out about the fact that Bobby may have been a victim of abuse, another guy comes forward. He's got a child skull, the skull of a 10-year-old male. Comes forward and he says, my dad gave this skull to me. He got it from the guy who was in charge of the camp. So when you look at that, is that a horrifying story? Yes. Does it tell you, do you pretty much know everything that happened there without knowing everything that happened there? Yes. But is it an unsolved missing persons case in a national park? No, it's not. But then on the alternative side, you've got, yeah, it's horrible. You've got, I'm so nonchalant about it because I can talk about this stuff every day of my life.
Right.
So for me, it's you know, I'm the guy that I was in contact with Gabby Petito's family the entire time that whole thing was going on. I still am. So this is my world. But you know, on the other end of it, you've got cases where there really is no explanation for what happened here. There's a case of a boy whose name was Garrett Bardsley. He was a 12-year-old Boy Scout, and they were up camping in the Uintah Mountains in Utah. I think it was like an hour and a half east or so of Salt Lake City. And he's fishing with his dad. He gets his socks wet. He decides, all right, I'm going to go change my socks and go back to camp. According to his dad, it was 150 yards from their campsite to where the socks were, or to where to they were fishing. Sorry. So if you've ever been in the woods, you know that if you shout, if you're even remotely shouting, somebody 150 yards away is going to hear you. That's going to echo off of trees. That's going to pass through that area. So he gets about halfway back to camp and he passes the turnoff for the camp, and his dad shouts, Garrett, you missed the turnoff. Garrett then comes back, hits the correct turnoff, and heads towards camp. 75 yards to go to camp. He is never seen again. They were up there, hundreds of searchers, helicopters, dogs, planes, people on four-wheelers. And keep in mind, this is Salt Lake City area. These are Mormons. These are the kind of people who they're out in force to protect the community. Not a shred of evidence of Garrett Bardsley is ever found, despite the fact that he was fully clothed and carrying a fishing pole when he went missing. Nobody found the fishing pole. Nobody found Garrett's clothes. They found a sock, but a searcher claimed that it might have been his sock. So cases like that, I look at it and I'm like, okay, well, what could possibly have happened there? Because they were up there. Nobody else they knew of was up there. Garrett was close enough that if he had been abducted, he probably would have screamed. If there was a mountain lion attack, there probably would have been blood or signs of a struggle. Also, he would have dropped the fishing pole. Like, what happened here to cause this boy to just completely vanish? And there's another one with a kid named Keith Parkins. I believe it's the Keith Parkins case, where even Les Stroud, the guy from Survivor Man, could only barely make the journey that Keith made. This was a toddler. He was like 3 years old. 12 miles in 22 hours he traveled when they found him.
Oh, that's nuts.
And it wasn't like a level ground.
No,
either.
we're talking out in the wilderness. We're talking like American Midwest and West. Yeah. So, I mean, there's Les Stroud couldn't get there. He was like, there's no way.
Tell people who Survivor Guy is, because I don't think a lot of people know who he is.
Sure. He was definitely more popular back in the 2000s when I was growing up, but he was on TV at a show called Survivor Man, and what he would do is the producers for, I think it was like Nat Geo or Discovery or something like that, they would take this guy and they would just drop him somewhere in the wilderness, and his job was he had to get to rescue.
All right, so
Bear Grylls, but real.
Compare and contrast him to Bear Grylls, whatever the guy's name is.
He is what Bear Grylls pretended to be.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the cool AF thing about this guy is Bear Grylls was surrounded by a production crew.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, like, if he did a long shot on the beach, he would walk all the way down the beach, set up his camera, walk all the way back, and then do the long shot himself.
Mm-hmm.
He self-produced everything. Yep. So he had the batteries, the cameras. There was no one. And he looked like, me or Crump. He didn't look like, Mr. fit guy or none of that. He just looked like some guy that had too much to eat at the buffet one day.
Yeah, he was just a guy out in the woods surviving, and it was, for me as a kid, that was like one of the coolest things ever. Is like, here's this guy going and doing all the stuff I read about in storybooks and going out there. And,
he was like not Mr. Commando, none of that. Just looked like any soccer dad.
He looks like he survived a plane crash 20 years ago, and he's just been living in the woods with the long hair and the outdoorsy outfits and everything. Like,
I survived a plane crash 20 years ago.
Did you actually survive a plane crash 20 years ago?
Twice.
Two.
He hit two houses one time, and the other time he hit.
I dipped the stock market on the first plane crash.
How?
He rear-ended a car in a plane.
The second plane crash, I rear-ended a car.
How did you rear-end a car?
Well, he landed on.
It wasn't going 100 miles an hour, and my plane lands at 100. That's how.
Did you land on a highway?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not really a highway, but there was 2 lanes in either direction. He was in the left lane going a lot slower.
Was this like an emergency landing? Like,
no, he just had to land on the road for no reason.
Yeah. I was assuming it was an emergency landing, but does that happen often? Is that a normal thing for pilots?
For Rich,
That happened to me twice.
It's one of those, he ended up in somebody's house with a plane.
If I had a nickel for every time I crashed a
roof
plane, I'd have 2 nickels. It's not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Yeah. Okay. Rich was looking up when I was telling Rich about you and your content, because I love your content. Wendigoon, who's a friend of yours.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, you guys did some collaborations together.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. We've done two Missing 411 collaborations with him, and then we have a podcast together called The Weird Bible, where we talk about weird stuff from the Bible.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's
stuff.
interesting.
It's really cool stuff. But so I was telling Rich that I really like this stuff, and I watch like everything that you guys do.
Oh, thank you.
And one of the things that he looked up was the M Cave.
Oh yes,
which he thought was kind of weird.
Yeah,
so he was asking questions about that.
Do we know where the M Cave is? Is that a known thing?
That is the question. So for anybody who doesn't know the story here, there's a guy named Kenny Beach, and Kenny was definitely eccentric, adventurous, and all of that. But he was also, a very good. He seemed like a good-natured, good-spirited guy. I couldn't really find anything of anybody who knew the guy who was like, he was kind of a jerk or he was arrogant or whatever. He just seemed like he had a couple of screws loose, but in the friendly, he's not going to harm anybody kind of way. But he was very into a lot of stuff that people who are typically a little bit more eccentric are into, Bigfoot, UFOs, all that. And living out near Nels Air Force Base, he was from Vegas, he would go and he would hike, and he knew the Air Force Base was there, and he knew that Area 51 was just 3 hours away. So he was watching a UFO video on YouTube, and he told a little story about how there was a guy telling the stories that his dad told him about Area 51 or something like that. Kenny, under the YouTube name Snakebit McGee, he commented underneath that, and what he said was that he had been out on a hike in the desert, and he had come across this M-shaped cave. The entrance was shaped like a capital M, and he was not saying kind of like an M. He was like, it was a capital M. And as he got closer to the cave, he said that he felt like his body was vibrating, like it made him very uncomfortable. Like he was warming up a little bit, and it's just like he didn't like it, and it made him uncomfortable, so he left. And he's telling this story, and a whole bunch of people, obviously, because the internet, don't believe him, and they're like, you're making that up, you're full of it. And Kenny's like, all right, well, fine. If you don't believe me, I'll go find the cave. So he makes this 34-minute video where he goes out into the desert and he's looking for the cave. And he's clearly, just kind of enjoying being out there. He talks about how he goes on these 40 or 50 mile hikes sometimes, and he'll come back and his toenails will be falling off. And, he's always sure to bring enough water, though. He wears snake guards. He knows his way around. He was in pretty good shape. He doesn't find the cave, though. So he posts the video, and immediately everybody, okay, well, you went out there, good for you, but there's still no cave. Kenny, not to be told that he's wrong, goes and finds even more comments that are telling him this. And he's like, even more determined. I am going to find this cave. So he says he's going to go out. He's going to stay, I think he said 3 nights, 2 nights, 3 days, or it might have been 3 nights. It's been a while since I covered this case. But he goes out into the desert. He doesn't come back. And so they launch a search. Not a huge search, but decent enough. And considering that he had put on video and in the comment exactly where he'd be going, you would expect that you might find him. They found nothing. They didn't find he had a gun. They didn't find that. He didn't bring his camera, apparently, which is interesting because why not bring the camera if you were trying to find the cave? Some people suggest, his girlfriend suggested that he went out there to kill himself. I don't know that I believe that, but it seemed like he was in debt, but he seemed like the kind of guy who would probably do anything to get out of debt before trying to kill himself, if you know what I mean. But he never found the cave. They never found him. All they found was his cell phone sitting on a mine shaft entrance, and they went down to the mine shaft, but he was not in the mine shaft. End of the day, there is supposedly an M-shaped cave that vibrates somewhere out in the Nevada desert. And there is a guy somewhere in the vicinity of that cave who is dead. Dozens of people have uploaded videos to YouTube looking for him. Nobody has found him. Probably hundreds of people have gone looking for him. Nobody has found him. It's completely inexplicable. And when you think about what he said, M-shaped cave, that sounds man-made. It sounds manufactured. And then if you look at, it made me feel like I was vibrating as I approached. That one, that feels a lot like an active denial system, like somebody put something in there, or maybe it was radiation storage. Seems like a weird place to have radiation, like radioactive material storage. But it sounds like either he was getting irradiated or like he was being presented with an active denial system of some sort. So the question there is, did he stumble across something? And if he did the military take him? Was he disposed of? Like, what happened?
Yeah, Rich, you said you read something where they found his cell phone or something?
Yeah, just what he said. I just kind of scanned,
okay.
Googled it a bit and scanned around.
Yeah.
The way I read it, it sounded like it was in a cave and there was a shaft. But it's from what you say, it sounds like it was on the surface.
It was on the surface, yeah. And this is,
Okay.
I will say, this is a problem that crops up with the Missing 411 stuff. And I think part of why our channel has done so well in covering it in terms of views. If you go online, there's a lot of cases. There's a lot of set sites like Strange Outdoors is one where you'll be able to read basically the whole case and everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is those sites basically only use David Paulides as a source. David's a good investigator, but he definitely there's moments where his confirmation bias seems to shine through a little bit.
Oh, a lot of moments.
Yeah, and so when you only use David, there's chances that you're going to have stuff in there that isn't the most accurate. And that's why we go and we look at police reports, news reports, witness interviews. We try and do the full scope.
And you also get, so one of my favorite stories is, I forget, there was some famous flight. It was a flight of, I don't know, Avengers or something like that, out of Florida, got lost in the Bermuda Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sounded like they got disoriented. I think one of the planes or some of the planes were later found in recent years.
Yeah, they found some of them recently that looks like they were ditched. They were totally not where they were supposed to, where they thought they were.
Interesting.
But that's probably, back in, but this is like World War II type planes.
Right,
so
right. This is post World War II. Basically you had a compass and, good luck. You had some radio beacon technology, but, really, really primitive navigation capabilities. And the story, like, people would write books about it, and then they would cite other books written about it, which had zero facts in them. And then they said, a PBY was sent after it to, find it, and it disappeared. It's like the PBY was known as a flying fuel tank, and they smoked, and it's apparently the thing burst into flames after takeoff. But they just say it disappeared after takeoff, In these stories, they're I remember as a kid, so it's probably like in the late 70s or mid 80s, where things like this were told. What was the show Leonard Nimoy did? In Search
Oh,
of?
yeah,
Oh
in Search
God, I
of.
know what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why I like the Lore Lodge and Wendigoon's channel and the stuff like that, because you guys actually do research.
For us, it's like, hey, this stuff's weird, and I keep telling people the way I got started was I saw a bunch of weird stuff on the internet, and I was like, hey guys, all this weird stuff is happening. A bunch of my friends were like, no, it's not. So I set out to prove to them that the weird stuff was happening. And what did I prove? I proved that the weird stuff was happening. It just wasn't quite as weird as we thought it was. So that's kind of where we've put ourselves, is we're in this weird middle ground between total skeptic and conspiracy theorists, where we're like, let's figure out what the truth of the conspiracy theory is, because there might be some. And sometimes we find something where we're like, wow, this actually is really weird. Like, I still don't totally understand the Bohemian Grove stuff. We looked pretty deeply into it.
Really?
That's not Moloch, it's Apollo. But why is it Apollo? And how did Christianity is involved in one of the plays involving Apollo that they do there. So it's far more nuanced and confusing than I thought. But also not as like demonic as I was expecting. And of course I said that, and I got a whole bunch of people calling me controlled opposition. And I'm like, listen, if you guys can show me evidence, like, I am happy to look at it, but I'm not going to take a Mark Dice book at face value.
I was going to say Mark Dice. Yeah, Mark Dice and Alex Jones have done a lot of reporting on that.
Yeah, well, that was the thing, is we looked at Alex Jones' video. I watched the entire hour-and-a-half long documentary he did. I sat there, and there were certain things that he brought up where I was like, wow, that's actually a really good point. He brings up something that a German chancellor, whose name is escaping me, wrote about Bohemian Grove back in the 80s. And I was like, I never would have found that on my own. So that's great. But then he keeps insisting that it's Moloch. And I'm like, the evidence suggests that the owl is Apollo, based on previous plays that they did. But even still, why are our elected representatives, our heads of industry, all of that, going to a secretive redwood grove every summer to do an owl ritual? Even if it is Apollo, that's still kind of strange, and I would still like to understand what's going on. And then there's other stuff that we look into, and we're like, oh, well, this isn't weird at all. This is like the CIA. You might have heard that the CIA had a classified document from 1965, and it was this book called The Adam and Eve Story, and they were hiding the truth about global resets and all that.
Yeah.
Turns out what it really was this guy, Chan Thomas, wrote a book where he cited people like Ignatius Donnelly and all of these 19th century antiquarians who weren't archaeologists or historians, really. They were more amateurs. They were interested in this stuff, and they worked with what they had. But at the time, we did not have tectonic plate theory. And so there were people who were educated, who were intelligent, who said, oh, well, maybe when the Earth's magnetic field weakens, when it shifts, maybe that takes the crust of the Earth and it goes like that. Maybe the crust of the Earth slips on the mantle, rearranges things, and that's why we've had Atlantis and these fallen civilizations and all that. And everyone said, oh, well, since the CIA classified it, it must be true. They're hiding it from us.
Yeah, it wasn't like just polar shift. He actually wrote that the Earth flipped on its side, then flipped back.
Yeah, and there's of course, what he says this would cause is so much carnage that the rest of the theory can't even possibly follow. It can't make sense because it would be so devastating to the Earth that non-microbial life probably wouldn't survive. And if it did, it probably wouldn't survive very long. So, and he says, by the way, this all happens in the course of like 6 to 12 hours. That the Earth rotates 90 degrees on its axis in 6 to 12 hours. No. Impossible. Literally impossible.
It would have to rotate at such a speed that it's like
thousands of miles per hour.
Yeah, the physics definitely don't work.
I think it was like 1,000. He basically says 1,000 miles per hour, and it's just no. There's no way. And the evidence is, oh, well, this woolly mammoth looks like it was suddenly brushed off a cliff by the wind, and I'm like,
so
it could have been a landslide. It could have tripped. It could have run off the side. It could have been standing on an ice ledge. Like,
are the frogs gay?
Well, they're trans. Yeah, that was the atrazine thing. I still cannot believe that he was right about that. Like,
Yeah.
But I bring that story up because you know what happened? You know who Chan Thomas was? Well,
No.
according to God, what is his name? I want to say Robert Wood, I think, the UFO researcher. According to him, in 1966, he was recruited by McDonnell Douglas, who was recruited by the Air Force, to look into some of this UFO tech stuff, some of this alien technology.
That's Bob Lazar's area of specialty.
It is. Yeah, it is. So according to Wood, he hired Chan Thomas. Chan Thomas was not hired because Chan Thomas was the smartest guy in the world. He had a master's in electrical engineering, so he was a smart guy, but he wasn't like Einstein. And he said the reason he hired him was because he was an out of the box thinker, that he had ideas that the rest of them typically wouldn't consider. So that's why they kept him on staff, despite the fact that he annoyed the hell out of all of the other scientists. Now, when you look at that, well, yes, Chan Thomas, hired by Robert Wood, hired by McDonnell Douglas, hired by the Air Force. Why might the federal government want to censor a book like that the year after it was published when the guy was recruited to work for the Air Force? Well, probably because they didn't want anybody finding out that nut job was working on their planes. Like that to me is Occam's razor here. The CIA went, right. This is nuts. And if anybody finds out this guy is working on our aircraft, nobody is going to want to fly them. I mean, it goes into the actual Genesis story and like tries to correct it according to these ancient Naga texts, which are just, this is before Maya had been deciphered. So we didn't actually know what the Mayan glyphs said at this time. So what he's claiming they say is basically guesswork. So he's saying, oh, well, the Mayan glyphs really say this, and you can retranslate the Adam and Eve story as this. And if you do that, and then you look at Noah's Ark, then it seems very likely that sometime in the next couple hundred years, the Earth's going to go through this major rotational shift. And the result is that Chan Thomas basically republished the book in 1993, and it wasn't censored at all, possibly because he was no longer working for McDonnell Douglas. And then you get guys like Suspicious Observers, which is a channel on YouTube, who go and take all of this and add in some scientific language to make it sound more legit. And then they present this to their audience and tell their audience that, oh, well, you know, this is coming and you can be prepared by buying your way into my ranch in Colorado for a minimum of $250. So he's a grifter using this kind of thing. But yeah, it's wild to look at the theory. I asked this guy to come on the show and explain it and basically have a debate, and he said he would, and then he ghosted me on email, which is why I call him a grifter.
Pay him $250 might be worth it.
Yeah, I would do it just to get him on the show. I mean, we'd make the money back. So it's not a big deal. I don't think he'll come on because this is something we run into now is we'll come across somebody who their channel is presenting unsolved mystery that is dangerous to you and you need to give me money to survive. Is something that, you know, will listen, you get on YouTube and you're like, I think Bigfoot exists and here's why. Cool. That is fine by me. If you get on YouTube and you say, here's why Bigfoot exists, he's real, it's true, and he's coming for you, but if you buy my product, I can defend you. That's when I start to draw the line. I'm like, I'm not going to play nice.
But did it pass the DLD After Dark test? Did DLD After Dark give him money?
DLD After Dark? I don't think I know that one.
One of our friends, another YouTuber.
Just said this. I'm not familiar with his work.
I'm not saying Dark's very gullible, but he sends me this guy like in his Suburban. The end of the world is near. Buy my product.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's truly incredible the lengths people will go to convince people to buy some bullshit.
All right. So we got a question.
Sure.
He asked about Doug Vaught, but I really want to hear about before we hit on Doug Vaught.
Do you know who's Doug Vaught?
I think I know.
I have no idea.
I believe if it's who I think it is, then it might be God, what's it? Is he talking about? I think he's talking about the Die Hold Foundation.
The Guy
The what
Hole
foundation?
Diehold Foundation.
Diehold. Oh, okay.
Let me see if
Okay, so Walters, I want to know if we're going about, we're saying the gray men, green men, whatever men all exist. Where's Bob Lazar? Shouldn't he be doing like a YouTube tour? And
Yeah, I don't know what to think with Bob Lazar. The stuff he said about three-letter agencies especially has sounded completely legitimate. Like, I know a lot of people still trust the FBI for some reason, but when he gets up there and he's like, oh yeah, the government's hiding things from you, I'm like, okay, continue. We knew this. Like, I'm taking that one at face value.
And what's new?
Go further.
Sunrises?
I watched him with Jeremy Corbell on Joe Rogan. And I will say this. I thought that everything he said was believable. At least everything he said on that podcast. I haven't gone into like any of his other work, but what I am skeptical about is the extent to which some of the stuff he says was covering his own ass. But I don't know. I don't know for sure. I do think that it's a little odd. He must really genuinely be in fear for his life if he's not going on YouTube and telling the truth about everything. Or he's not telling the truth. But I would be willing to believe that if he actually did work for Area 51 and he actually did see some of this stuff and the government did go to those lengths to destroy his life, I would understand why he wouldn't feel super comfortable doing his own YouTube show about it.
Okay, so I'm thinking, not that I have the free time or the ability, but there seems to be very provable things about Bob Lazar. It's like, did he go to MIT? MIT says no.
MIT says no, but here's the weird thing. There's people that went to MIT that claim that they knew Bob Lazar at MIT.
Yeah.
And it's not just like one or two people. It's a lot of people.
That's the problem I have too.
And stuff,
Okay, so I got plausible deniability for that. I went to Suffolk Community College, which was down the road from Stony Brook University. But a buddy of mine had stayed at the dorm there. I was drunk there enough and walking around and bumping into people. They might think I went to Stony Brook.
That they
had classes with him.
They had classes with him, including I think a couple professors said, yeah, he was in my class.
Yeah, I'd have to look into. I'm curious because I should look into that. That's something that interests me. But yeah, that's the thing is when it comes to and this is what I mean with conspiracy theories. You come to me and you say, hey, Bob Lazar says he worked for Area 51 and saw weird stuff. The government tried to destroy his life and that he went to MIT. And then the government says, no, Bob Lazar did not work for us and we did not try to destroy his life. Okay, I don't believe you. You're the government. I can't trust a word you say. So then you go to MIT. Oh, well, did Bob Lazar go here? There's the possibility that there is somebody from the government who came to MIT earlier that day and said, hey, if anybody asks, Bob Lazar didn't go here. And if he did, you're never getting a government contract again. So MIT would, of course, say he didn't go there. So it really does come down to, can somebody show me a Polaroid of them standing next to Bob Lazar at a frat party that he only could have been at if he was at that college as a student? Can you show me a class picture that he's in, something like that? That would be where I would start to ask questions is, I can't trust anything MIT says. And for the sake of fairness, I can't trust anything he says. I'm going to look for evidence for all of it. And so that's how we do our research.
All right. Is Michelle Obama a dude named Mike?
I think it's one of the funnier conspiracy theories. I'll say this much on it. I have never looked deeply into it enough. It seems plausible at face value. But I think that's just because all I've seen is a couple of pictures that are like, this is Obama's best friend, Michael, when they were in high school. And this is Michelle Obama right now. They're the same height. I'm like, okay. I feel like there would be record of this if this were true, but it's entertaining. And now
they say there's no pictures of Michelle Obama pregnant.
I have heard that. But I also, this is the other thing, is I just dealt with the Tartaria conspiracy. I don't know if you know this one.
No, let's go ahead and talk about that. I do know about it, but I think it's very interesting.
Oh, okay.
I think Rich is going to get a kick out of it.
So the way Tartaria works is when I have first encountered this, it was Tartaria was an empire that existed in Siberia, and the governments of the world swept it under the rug at some point. It turns out it's considerably larger than that. It includes the idea that, excuse me, our history has been fabricated. What?
Walton.
Well,
I don't know. I mean, I don't think my wife has bigger shoulders than me, but
all right, let's get back to the Tartaria.
The Tartaria thing. So the way that it works is it typically suggests that we are either that the Catholic Church fabricated either about 300 or about 1,000 years of history, primarily the Middle Ages
stuff, which is interesting, or like fabricated history. Like it's not the year's not like 2023. We're like
it'll be 1023 would be the idea. And that Christ's millennial reign already happened, and it goes on. There's the letter J is secretly standing for Jesus, and that's why in some dates it says J754. That means it's 754 years after the birth of Jesus, and in reality, it's just a stylized one. But don't let that get in the way of your fun, I guess. And we have evidence of that, by the way. But they've said that this was an advanced civilization, that it was world spanning, and depending on who you talk to, they will present different versions. We had a guy on Sunday or on Monday, sorry, who his version of it was a lot more tame. It was basically things have been rewritten. Not that there was some Atlantean civilization and everything started from west and moved east necessarily. But that's kind of how it works. Is the theory we were dealing with is that Atlantis falls, the survivors land in Ireland, restart civilization there. Hebrew is actually the original priestly language of the Irish religion, which was the cult of Yesa. And then over time, they spread out and spread the Irish language, which is, of course, the original European language. That got spread out throughout Europe and the East. All of Arabic and Chinese history was fabricated by the Catholic Church, and the Jews aren't really the Jews. That was just something that was made up by the Catholics at the end of the medieval period, which didn't happen, by the way. The medieval period didn't happen according to this theory. So how did this happen at the end of the medieval period? It makes no sense. The Crusades and the Battle of Troy are the same thing. Like it's bonkers stuff. And we
believe it though.
There are people that believe it intensely. It is really interesting, but when you dig into it, there are also a lot of them are flat earthers too.
Most of them are flat earthers from what I'm looking into.
But they'll get the tiniest bit of information. They'll look at an old map that says Grand Tartary on it, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's proof." And it's like, no, that's just the word that was used for Siberia by the Europeans who had never been there. Like. They called them the Tartars because the Persians called them the Tatars, and that didn't work with French. So it went from Tatar to Tartare. It's like it's not what they think it is. But the reason I bring it up when you said like stuff about pictures, like there's no pictures of Michelle Obama from when she was pregnant, whatever. That's kind of the thing. One of the crux of their argument in many cases is look at all these old world buildings, as they call them, which is really just Gothic revival, Moorish revival, neoclassical, Greek revival, all of that stuff. The Capitol building, for example, the Tampa Bay Hotel, the City Hall in Philadelphia, which, by the way, there are numerous pictures of it being built. And they'll say, we have no construction photos. And then you show them the construction photos, and then they go, oh, well, those are doctored. Like, listen, what's more likely, that every single construction photo of these buildings that exists was doctored, or that you're wrong? In order for you to be right, Occam's razor has to be thrown not only out the window, but put onto a Tesla rocket and sent into space. Like, you have to take Occam's razor and melt it down. Like, there's nothing you cannot possibly look at the simplest explanation, because if you do, the entire theory falls apart, which is hilarious to me. But we've now spent 2 full weeks doing research on this theory and hitting every single point of it and being like, this is false, this is false, this is false, this is false, this is misleading. And we have people in our comments who, it doesn't matter how many points we bring up, it doesn't matter how much proof we show them, they will never be convinced. And the thing is, you look at that, well, with Tartaria, it's pretty ridiculous. But then, you say, well, what about, there can't be that many of these people that will just buy things that are fed to them.
That I want to get to.
I like what you got going on here, your hustle. So you have a YouTube channel that's either feeding or depriving crazy people of their theories, and then they get mad at you, which drives engagement. You're brilliant.
Yeah. There's a couple other things I really want to get to.
Sure, go for it.
One is in Canada. It's like what is it, the Valley of the Headless?
Oh yeah, the Nahanni River Valley. They call it the Valley of Headless Men.
Yeah, the Valley of Headless Men, and it when the tribe were like, don't go live over there.
There's so that one.
This is interesting.
It's interesting. You will get versions of the story that say that this goes back thousands and thousands of years. It really seems that it all begins around 13 or 1400 BC. Or sorry, not BC, AD. It's up in Northwest Territories, Canada. Beautiful national park called the Nahanni River Valley National Park Preserve. Also
known as the Valley of Headless Men, which is probably somewhere you don't want to camp at.
Exactly. But it wasn't always known that way. For a while, it was just the Nahanni River Valley. And the people who lived there were the Dene, Native Americans. This is one of the larger groups, one of the larger families of Native American tribes. And the word Dene just means the people. It's the same thing that we got when Rome went all over Gaul and Britain and said, "Who are you?" And they just gave him the name of whatever their word for us was. And then you hear that hundreds of years ago in the ancient past, there was a tribe called the Naha, and they lived up in the mountains. Nahanni. They lived up in the mountains. They were very warlike, violent, a large tribe, a dangerous tribe. And eventually the other tribes got together and said, you know what? We need to get rid of these guys. We're going to exterminate the problem once and for all. It's us or them. They go up into the mountains and they see the camp and they decide to wait for nightfall. Nightfall comes. They sneak back up to the camp. And as they go into attack, they see that there's nobody there. It's been completely abandoned. Food's still out. Fire's still burning. Tent's still up. Building still standing, nobody there. Around the exact same time, historically, or I shouldn't say around the exact same time, but also hundreds of years ago, a group of foreigners show up around the Pueblo nations. So Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, down there, that area, northern Texas. The Pueblo talk about these people who came down and how different they were and how they came from the north. They spoke a different language. They had a different religious system. They hunted differently. They fought differently. Very different group of people. That was around 13 or 1400 AD. The Navajo are a Dene-speaking people who showed up around 13 or 1400 AD. Exactly about the time that a group of people called the Naha left Nahanni River Valley. So we start to see crumbs of how these folk stories can be true. These oral histories, while they might leave gaps, they are legitimate. It's very likely that the reason we have the Navajo and the Apache in the American Southwest is because they are the Naha tribe who left. Now, is that story about the Naha disappearing overnight true? It's probably embellished. It was probably over the course of a couple of weeks that these people just disappeared. It's probably that they went up, scouted the camp, put together the army, and then a few weeks later went up and they were gone, and they said they disappeared overnight. Over time, whisper down the lane, stories get told. 1900 hits. Gold rush, gold prospecting, pretty big business. A couple of guys from British Columbia and Washington, the McLeod brothers, they decide they're going to go up and check out some of these endless reserves of gold that the Native Americans talk about. They do. They get there and they find tons of gold. They sleuth a whole bunch of it up. They put it into their raft. Raft capsizes. They come back home. They tell everybody what happened. They decide we're going to go back out. So they do. They're gone for a year. Their brother Charlie's back home. Gone for 2 years. 3 years come. Frank and Willie still are not back. Frank and Willie McLeod, gone. The people who live in the area at the various forts, like Fort Simpson and all that, the last they saw of them, they were getting ready to head into the park. Well, not the park yet, but the valley. basically the way the valley works is there's this long river, the Nahanni, that winds through it. And it goes through these various stages where in one of them, the cliff sides are basically right up to the edge of the water, and they go up 3,000 feet. So just sheer 3,000-foot cliffs. Very narrow beaches, if any beach at all. The McLeod brothers and their companion, whose name is escaping me for the moment, never show up. So Charlie goes looking for them. He goes back to where they said they would be. And what he finds is a tent and 2 skeletons, one of which is still in the tent, the other of which is outside of the tent, and the arm is outstretched, reaching for a rusted out rifle that's leaning against a tree. Both the skeletons are missing their heads. A little further down the river, Richard Weir, that was his name, Weir.
Yeah.
Like a mile down the river, they find another headless corpse. Can't say for certain it's Richard Weir, but probably Richard Weir. And that starts a little bit of a trend, because for the next 45 years, people who go into Nahanni River Valley, who are prospecting for gold, trapping, hunting, primarily white folks. The McLeods, by the way, were Métis. They were half native, half French. So they actually, this is why it's weird. This is why a lot of people were like, oh, well, it's the obvious. The Native American tribes don't want white people in the area taking the resources. It's not that simple. Frank and Willie were both very well liked and very well known by all of the Native Americans they encountered. A lot of the natives actually helped direct the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. At the time, it was like the Royal Northwest Territories Mounted Police. Okay. So there's 5 or 6 more of these incidences over the next 40 or so years. And it's pretty typically the same thing. Hunter, trapper, prospector, somebody goes out there, they never come back. They go out to look for the person, and what they find is that person dead, headless, no real explanation of how they died. And in some cases, there was one guy who went prospecting. He found a bunch of gold, wrote back that he had found gold, sent his partner back, said, I'm just going to winter here. Partner gets back. Gold is gone. The cabin is burned down. His buddy's head is gone. And there's no explanation for what happened. Now, is it possible that somebody, that his partner actually did go back at some point and kill his partner, take the gold, cut off his head? It's kind of hard to get in and out of the valley during the winter. 2005 rolls around. This has been quiet for 70 years. 70 years, nothing has really happened. Especially since the place became a national park in the 1960s, which, by the way, you're not allowed to go in the caves that are there for your own safety, because you might get stuck. The caves that are full of hundreds of Dall sheep skeletons that we don't know why they're there. You're not allowed to go in those caves. Yeah.
It's kind of weird, right?
And of course, the question, well, why not look into it with a drone? Well, radio frequencies, right? You got to be able to get to wire the drone. Problem solved. Drone is wired. Drone goes into the cave. But yeah, in 2005, there's a couple of guys who I believe were in their 50s. So we're not talking frail old 80-year-old men here. Everybody talks about them as like they're old guys. They were like 50s or 60s. These are men who are still very much capable of being out alone. And they weren't even alone. They were in a cabin, 2 of them, fully stocked, electricity, food, everything they possibly needed. I don't quote me on electricity. That one might not be true. It might have not had electricity. They go up for a weekend. This is on the northern side of Nahanni. Everything else happened kind of on the southern side. They go up for a weekend. They're not back. Their families get concerned, decide to go and look for them. Neither of them were in the cabin. Cabin is totally fine. It's got food, weapons, drinks, everything you could possibly need. Hasn't burned down. No structural problems. No sign that they would have needed to leave the cabin for any reason. A few days later, they end up finding one of the men. He is in a bush. I can't remember. I think they said he died of exposure. He had burn marks on his arms, on his forearms. Completely unexplained burn marks. They said maybe he tried to start a fire, but they never found any remnants of a fire. The other guy is found, I believe it was a week or so later, floating in the river, about 20 miles away. They said he drowned. Nobody at any point explained why either of them left the cabin. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police did not seem to care. And that part is probably what's most interesting to me, is that every single time I come across a missing persons case in Canada, the RCMP are always at the center of it, and they are always the reason that it was so badly researched, so badly investigated, so badly done. It's like they almost are trying not to solve these cases. And some cases, it's, oh, well, it was a native. And we know that the Canadian government and the natives don't really get on, and the Canadian government has a tendency to pretend the natives aren't there and just ignore them because they don't really matter. They're only 3% of the population. Come on. That's why we have the MMIW issue, and that's why it was one of the huge things that Trump did that, I think that Trump should have focused more on this stuff when he was running his second time. A huge thing that he did was he started a task force to try and figure out what was going on. Why are Native American women disappearing and being murdered at rates that far outstrip their demographics? Why is that happening? Why is this not? Why are people never caught? Why is nothing ever solved? And he did that in 2019. I believe Biden has continued it, to my understanding. But it took until 2019 for this issue to be recognized and for something to be done about it. And that's in the United States. Canada, to my knowledge, has done no such thing. But then it gets weirder because you would say, all right, well, maybe it's just because they're native and the Canadian government is racist. Totally possible. Except they are just as bad when it comes to white people. White people go missing, the Canadians are just as bad at investigating. I cannot understand it because it's not Canadian people. It's the RCMP. Because Canadian people always seem to find their friends. When their friends go missing, the Canadian population figures it out almost immediately. Bart Schleier is a great example of this. This is a guy who went to school for wilderness conservation. His job was to hunt, tranquilize, and tag grizzly bears in Yellowstone.
Well,
he went hunting for Kodiak brown bears with a bow and arrow on Kodiak Island. His job for a while, he was recruited by a science expedition in Siberia to do the same thing he did with grizzlies with Siberian tigers, which are one of the most dangerous animals in the entire world. These things are 8 to 11 feet long and hundreds upon hundreds of pounds. They move very fast and they will not hesitate to kill you. That was his job. He goes on a trip, a hunting trip, moose, I think, up in Canada to Reed's Lakes. This is in, I want to say, the Yukon, I want to say. It's either the Yukon or whatever's right south of the Yukon. I'm not good at Canadian geography. I'm actually better at
Yellowknife or whatever.
It was Whitehorse was the town the town that everything was stationed out of. I'm better with European geography than I am Canadian, and that's very strange now that I think about it. But yeah, so he goes hunting. It's a 2-week trip. He gets dropped off by a float plane, sets up camp, goes out to hunt, does his thing. 2 weeks later, float plane comes back. Bart's not at camp. Float plane pilot calls the police. The police come out. They do their investigation, which just finds that Bart's not there.
Yep,
and that's
he
it.
ain't there.
And they're like, he probably just walked to a nearby highway. And his friends are like, if he had survived walking to a nearby highway and had gotten to safety, he would have called us, which he would have. As far as, and by the way, this is not like the distant past. This was like 2006, if I'm remembering my years correctly. This was not a long time ago. Cell phones were a thing. His friends don't believe it. His friends don't buy it. So they fly down. It takes them a few hours to find his stuff. They don't find him yet, but they find his stuff. They call the RCMP back. They come out. They find some remains along with the stuff. The remains appear to be human. They are probably Bart's. And they just say, it was probably a bear attack. They did. You know who didn't say it was a bear attack? The Yukon conservation officer there, who was an expert on bear attacks, said, and I'm near quoting here, said, "This does not bear the hallmarks of a bear attack." Like, he said, this does not have the hallmarks of a bear attack. It is unclear how Bart died. And the Canadian police to this day say it was a bear attack. They found, there was a photographer who died. I know it's a famous case, but I can't remember his name. Photographer who died in Alaska. He was eaten by a bear. He actually managed to capture himself being eaten by a bear on camera.
Oh, was that the guy with the girlfriend?
The grizzly man.
Yeah, I think so. It was up in Alaska.
Oh.
And when they found and killed the grizzly, his clothes were in the grizzly's stomach. and in the scat. When they found the grizzly scat in the area that Bart Schleyer died, there were no clothes in it. There were also no human remains in it, at least not bones. And the thing about bears that a lot of people don't know, and that a lot of people probably would like to continue not knowing, so I'm sorry, bears don't kill you first. Bears incapacitate you and then they eat you. If you are dead or alive, it does not matter to the bear. The bear is going to eat you. Doesn't matter how much you thrash or scream. And then once it's done with you, it's going to take the leftovers and bury them underground and come back for them later. There was no cache. They couldn't. If a bear ate Bart, it ate him all in one, which doesn't happen. It's a 200-pound man. Bears do not eat an entire 200-pound man, especially not at a time of year when they're not supposed to be particularly hungry. So nobody knows what happened to Bart, and the Canadian government doesn't seem to care.
Wow.
Now, am I saying that it was like the Wendigo? No. But am I saying it's weird? Yes.
Yeah, you just don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is a theory about those caves that there's some subhuman species living in them or something. Last question, then we're going to get out of here.
Sure,
I
yeah.
guess they eat mushrooms.
That would be possible. Would not be the most ridiculous thing ever. And of course, you've got your oh shit. Move my desk. You got your movies like The Descent that has, the crawlers who live in the caves. I don't know if either of you guys have seen that one. Honestly, a great horror movie. Like really, really good movie. Very good acting, very good writing, not over the top at all. And not cheesy. But in that movie, there's these creatures that live underground in caves. And I won't go any further to spoil it, but they used to be human. We'll put it that way. Well, in Native American folklore, in British Columbia, in 1929, they talked to a guy named JW Burns, who was a Canadian journalist and teacher who was teaching English on the reservation. They told him about the Saskets, this tribe of somethings that lived out to the east in the mountains. And the Saskets, according to them, were taller. And to be clear, the natives couldn't totally agree on what the Saskets were. And the elders would not talk to him because he was an outsider. So he had to get, his friends, basically, the people who trusted him, to tell him the stories. And they didn't tell the stories quite as uniformly as those elders may have. But what they told him was that the Saskets are a race of giants. By giant, they mean 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall. We're not talking 12 to 18 feet. We're not talking biblical giants, Race of giants. They live in the caves, out in the woods. They are very tall. They are about twice as broad as we are. And they're capable of human speech. They're also extremely violent when disturbed. By disturbed, I mean if you're hunting and you shoot near them. One guy gets chased back to his house by one, according to the story. There's another one where a bunch of young men go out and they see a cave entrance and they see a large boulder next to it. And they go back and they tell the elders about it. And the elders are like, oh, that's where the Saskets live. Don't go back there. It's dangerous. Well, they go back there. No more cave entrance. Boulder is still there, but no more cave entrance. And what they realize is that the boulder was probably rolled in front of the cave entrance. Another story involves one of them, a woman a hunter, shoots what he thinks is a bear or something like that. It turns out it's like a 14-year-old kid. I won't go into how you make that mistake. I don't know. And the kid made some sort of noise, and then he starts hearing all of these calls from out in the woods coming from every direction. And one of these things shows up. It's a female, and it talks to him in a human language, a Native American language, but a human language. And so the Saskets, according to the Native American folklore, are either also Native American, or there's something else that is neither European nor Native American. And it sounds like a hominid. So what you're looking at here is hominid species, possibly Homo sapiens, could be Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, could be Homo sapiens denisovensis, or denisova. Those are both shorter than modern men. Is there a third or fourth human variety that we don't know about that we did breed with at some point? And as we know, as it seemed to become more apparent, the Native Americans did not come over in one wave 13,500 years ago. it seems like either they came in waves, or that wave where they came in was way earlier. Who's to say that 100,000 years ago, there wasn't a wave of early humans, early Homo sapiens sapiens, who made it over there, established themselves, got isolated during the Ice Age, and then when more Native Americans came in during the Pleistocene, the late Pleistocene, the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, that they got pushed out, or they decided not to interact, that they were seen as monsters, and that they went and did their own thing. Yeah, is it the most likely thing in the world? No, but when you look at the time period, 1929 in Vancouver, like east of Vancouver, easily could have been a small population out there surviving. And when you're aware that the breeding population for humans is only about 50 individuals, you don't need much. 50 to 500 individuals could live out there alone and nobody would ever know. So I look at it and I'm like, if Bigfoot's real, he's our cousin.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure, this was fun.
The Lore Lodge, I'm going to put his channel in the description. Do you want to plug anything else, or just the Lore Lodge?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much everything is under the Lore Lodge or my name, Aiden Mattis. So I'm basically everywhere under those two things. And if you're interested in folklore, the paranormal, and me making passive aggressive comments about 3-letter agencies and places where they really don't belong, then you would love the show. I somehow managed to roast the ATF in 1 out of every 3 videos. It's impressive, I think.
Yeah, he does. He's not. You're not overly political,
No.
but if you
it's not a political show.
When you make when you make jokes about the ATF a lot.
Yeah,
a lot.
We give the dog whistle that we hate the government, but it's not blatant.
It's not like in your face, but
I'll just offhandedly refer to Ruby Ridge or something.
Besides Wendigoon, his Waco video, that was kind of
all right. I want to ask you a parting question, because actually Dark, or DLD After Dark, his channel got hit with a strike for conspiracy theories. How do you avoid that?
We don't say anything that's not verifiably true. Like everything we say when it's part of a conspiracy theory, we present it as, here are all of the known verifiable facts about this thing, and we avoid very, very aggressively speculation about living people, politicians, certain issues. We're not gonna do. Can I ask what the subject of the video was, if you know?
I don't recall the specifics. It was a show I was on with him.
Sure. So, was it a live show, like a podcast?
Yeah.
That might be part of it. It's definitely easier to get struck on those. Like I've seen a lot of people take hits for those, but the way that we do it, and the way I think we've avoided it, is like our video on Bohemian Grove. A lot of people got mad at us because we would not say the words Alex Jones. We refused to. The video was still ad restricted when it went up, even though at no point did we say anything that was not basically like on the Wikipedia page. Now, did we use Wikipedia for our research? No. But was anything we said like super conspiratorial? We're not like, we're not Alex Jones. We're not presenting it that way. But what we found is that if everything you say can at least be backed up with a legitimate fact-based argument, then you're pretty safe. You're not always going to be safe, but there's certain topics that you definitely can't go into. For the most part, with conspiracy theories, as long as you're not going out and blaming like a specific ethnic group, a specific religious group, a specific political group, something like that, then usually you'll be okay. There are certain ones that you got to familiarize yourself with and know to avoid, though. Topics like
elections,
election integrity, COVID, anything from the last 10 years, honestly. Interestingly enough, we've never gotten hit for talking about the WEF. We have basically called the WEF the real Bohemian Grove 4 times, and not once have we been struck for it. So it might be that we're kind of one of those channels that like with Timcast. I don't know if you guys watch any Tim Pool stuff, but there are times where they're definitely toeing the line, and YouTube lets it happen, where with smaller channels, they might not. I think we do have a little bit of a benefit of that, in that we do make conspiracy content, but it's the kind that encourages people to be curious and thoughtful, not just to hate the government, not just to assume that you're being lied to. We're like, here's what we can prove to you. Make of it what you will. And I think that's been helpful for us in terms of avoiding demonetization, avoiding strikes. And then also just your language is very important. If you avoid, all the other stuff that might get you hit, like cursing, graphic discussions about violence or sexuality, if you avoid everything like that and you just give people the facts, YouTube's very likely to just kind of, they want your content up, they make money from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As long as they can keep their ESG score pretty high by having plausible deniability, they're fine. That's all they care about. YouTube, at the end of the day, this is what I will love to tell my progressive friends. I'm like, all those progressive companies, they are more capitalist than you could ever imagine. They just think that you're dumb enough to buy their products.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Aiden. Also, Aiden plays in Call of Duty, and he's registered for the Call of Duty tournament. I
did. I will be there. I'm bringing two of my good friends. Hoping one of our guys will carry the team. Because John and I are not that good.
Yeah, you're not going to be with contractor.
No, Mikey and all those guys had so many people already. They didn't even tell me about the tournament first.
Dude, they're good. I mean,
I play with Mikey and Ben all the time. Mikey, Ben, Sam, that whole crew, contractor. I would have loved to be on either Mikey or Ben's squad, but it is what it is. I got two of my own. I think we're gonna do better than they're expecting us to. I'm psyched.
Nice. Well, we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, but it's fun. So thank you guys so much for watching. You can follow Flying Rich at Flying Rich Firearms, Flying Rich all over, including MySpace, Flying Rich _official on Instagram. And yeah, on my main channel, I will not be dropping a video for the next few days. I'm taking a few days off just to recharge because I've done a video every day for the past 6 months.
That was me today. Today I got up to work and I was like, this is not going to be one of those days. I'm going to lay on my couch with my dog.
Yeah.
I need this.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And we will not be here next week on the podcast, but we will be back the week after. And then the last week in July will be gone again because I'll be traveling the world. Well, not really traveling the world, just going to some Central American countries. Other than that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and we are out of here. Thank you so much, Aiden. Like I said, this was been a gun show, but I wanted to get Aiden on here because you're gonna go, if you start watching this content, you will go down a rabbit hole, and they'll be like, "Oh my god, it's 6 o'clock in the morning."
Yeah, it's always nice when somebody is like, "Oh, I had this video on, but I fell asleep," and I'm like, "Cool." That means you were watching it even though you were tired.
Right.
That makes me happy.
All right.